And the kids that need role models, adults in their lives right now at our schools, they're the ones that are suffering the most. And so how can we double down and triple down our efforts to make sure our kids are okay? And the biggest thing, it wasn't so much the mitigation of learning and loss that we were worried about with our population, our children, and our programs, but really the mental well-being of our students. And so when we got together to start to plan not only for distance learning and responding to our kids and making sure that we were meeting their needs, we also needed to think about simultaneously, what is this going to look like when we reopen? So one of the things that we do is just don't continue the services we've been providing. They just look differently. You know, we work with the National College Resource Foundation. We have college mentors for our children who look like our children, who had maybe similar experiences. There are still touch points at least once or twice a week where they're engaging with our kids and just making sure that they're okay, and continue to mentor them and support them in life or with work. We've developed a script for our programs of how counselors, mental health therapists call and just do check-in with our kids for our most vulnerable, and asking the questions, you know, are you okay? Do you need more food? We have turned into a one-stop shop for community needs, and we're going outward facing. Even though the kids aren't coming to us, we have a number. I've been incredibly inspired by teachers, classified, and everybody who have just rolled up their sleeves, do no contact visits to our kids, dropping off work, setting up appointments for academic help. And we've now become kind of a conduit, if you will, for feeding families. It started off as just feeding kids who qualified for free and reduced that still continue to need that, but it's really evolved into something different. As you know, many of our families are facing job loss and economic strain. So we cannot provide this type of support enough. With the anxiety coping strategies, the more contact our kids have with adults in our school communities, the better. So that's why we make these check-ins such a vital part of what we do. We're asking our academic teachers who are teaching, for those who have access at home, to build in, and we've given them resources for social emotional learning in addition to academics. And more importantly, as I mentioned before, culturally responsive assignments, making sure that we are understanding and in tune with helping kids develop their sense of self, proud of where they've been in this Indigenous classroom. None of this has happened, but I can't sugarcoat this. And you know, it breaks my heart. We've lost 2 kids to suicide. Our undocumented children are going through an unbelievable experience with being left out of some of the stimulus efforts at the federal level. And so we have just, you know, doubled and tripled down on making sure we do whatever it takes to help our kids during this time. And for those that don't have access, for those who don't have Wi-Fi, you know, we've opened our print shop. We're making sure they're getting the materials in another form and still making those connections with our kids every day. So, in looking at what I wanted to share with you a couple of documents. I said this was going to be messy, and holding true to my word. This is a document we asked districts to consider in these uncertain times and in this this era of unpredictability and uncharted waters. You know, schools have become very accustomed to collecting and using data, so much that we have data saturation, if we will. And a lot of the data points that we have now, I think we need to shift a little bit just in the interim. And so we provided this document. And
was we still seeing the slide presentation? Are you trying to show us something else?
I am, and I put it up here. It's not showing up, huh?
Yeah, you might have to stop the share and then restart.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. You have a very supportive audience as well. They have been saying wonderful things in the chat to try to, to be helpful.
So is that better?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, now I know what to do.
Yep.
So these alternative matrices, if you will, we wanted to make sure that districts are capturing all the important pieces that we need to know now, not just our programs, but everywhere. And we wanted to, more importantly, in this new era where digital learning is going to become commonplace, you know, I think in San Diego, for an example, we have 80% of our communities have access to internet. And what's scary about that figure is that it includes cell phone. It doesn't talk about broadband. It doesn't talk, and a lot of our parents are, you know, as you know, are losing cell phone coverage now as well. So we have to be mindful of the fact that what we want to do moving forward, it's going to call for us to do some very creative and bold initiatives to get kids what they need and deserve. You know, I don't remember Obama's quote specifically. He had one that always resonated with me. It talked about, you know, we demand Wi-Fi access in our coffee shops. Shouldn't this be commonplace in our schools? And then I think it extends to the home. I think that, you know, if this is something that we have to work very hard. And I think the governor and the legislature and the California Public Commission recognized this. They took some very swift action and put a lot of money behind it. But it's still not going to be enough. And I think this is one of the areas we need to pay attention to, because if we don't know who those children are that don't have access, are they going to need to be in school every day, and can we accommodate that? These are all considerations we need to make. And I think we have to separate our most vulnerable kids, our foster, our homeless that need, in some cases, our schools deeply. I think we have to make special considerations for them when we start to think about coming back. So it was just all trying to collect what are the logistics of what people have, how many kids are able to participate in the types of learning that is going on out there, call logs, do they have food, mental health, well-being, what community-based organizations are plugging in the gaps where. And then, so when we collect this as a county, we can have very targeted and intentional conversations with our lawmakers and community-based organizations and businesses around this. These are the areas where we need some more support for our children. But this is going to be helpful for us in planning to open if we know exactly where our communities stand. I am going to stop share again, pull up a different document. Bear with me, I apologize. Hopefully this works. All right, are we looking at an Adobe recovery plan?
We can't really, it's small, so we can't really read it, but if you're gonna just explicate on what's in there, that's fine.
And everyone will have access to this.
Yeah, later on.
Is that better?
Yes, it is much better.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through this whole document, but we really wanted to make sure. So we have a presence at our Emergency Operations Center. That information is brought to our cabinet every day. And as we talked about the opening of school, what needs to happen, what needs to occur. And the direction from our Department of Health here is, yes, it will look very different. They are saying today, and it can change, that that face coverings and social distancing must be in place. So what are these assumptions on the impact of school? Obviously, budget is a big one. We are anticipating, I think, some decrease in enrollment due to the fact that we know that some of our children who we've tried to reach out to, we're getting messages that some have moved out of state or out of the country. We anticipate an increase in homelessness due to the economic conditions that we're currently in. And what will the impact on our schools, you know, from feeding to everything else, we will see, I am almost sure, an increase in the number of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. We have to be prepared for the attendance rates to change. And one of the things that we're, you know, pushing for legislatively and on the advocacy front is to really think about funding education from an enrollment basis and not an ADA basis, taking attendance, because we have to consider all aspects of this. We have to look at schools. If they're 50% of the kids on campus, 25% of the kids on campus, what does that look like? And I think it's going to completely reframe our after-school providers and classified staff to take on a different meaning during the school day because of these limitations on the number of students that we can have in one place at one time. The cleaning, do we have access to PPEs? We're even talking about getting quotes on symptom checks for both adults and kids before they come to school. All of this may happen in this document. None of it may happen, but I think the most important thing is we need to be prepared for every contingency. And that's what we keep telling districts, is that this is going to look very different. We already have now started to see some examples in other countries who have reopened schools, and it does look very different. We also know that there will be a lot of trepidation and fear, and many of our parents who are able to do so will probably not send their kids back immediately. And so what we've talked to districts about when really formulating their distance learning plans is to make sure that they are robust, viable, and sustainable so that when school starts, kids who want to continue in that format can do so. We expect that we are going to have a crunch in special ed due process for compensatory services. We know that their special ed is really spotty right now. The feds have not waived the requirements for special ed, but they have said there needs to be flexibility and understanding. We don't know what that's going to look like in the next couple months even. I mean, and for us, we have a program severely handicapped, and that is a very physically demanding job for our educators, and that's been put on the onus of the families during this time. We also know that we're going to have to think about staffing differently. We're going to have individuals who work in our schools, who are employees that may fit into that high-risk category. How do you treat them differently? How do you staff it differently? What jobs can truly be done remotely and not on campus, and what can? And again, I keep saying this over and over because I want this to be in front of our minds here in the county. As our most vulnerable and our historically underserved kids who need our school every day, we have to make provisions to treat this differently. We have to be flexible. We have to, I envision the high schools almost looking like colleges to some degree, where there's appointments with teachers to get additional help, almost like resource centers, and independent study will become more commonplace. Again, we put this together 4 weeks ago. It's had a lot of traction, and I just offer it up to anybody who wants to use it. It's just trying to be mindful about everything that we need to think about in order to school. We know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of uneven outcomes for our kids during this time. So we can't ignore that, and we have to use this awful situation that we're in and turn it into something incredibly positive to change the narrative for our kids. So I left this with the group. You'll have access to it. Use it if you want. Again, it's just a resource, and it's something that our team of 35 folks here in the county have been working on for quite some time. They've done a really good job. And again, it's just building contingencies and planning for everything. So moving on to learning loss. As I mentioned before, I'm worried more about the kids who need the most help than as opposed to anything. And Arenda is a partner that works with a couple of our districts here under the Think Together Broad. They're an after-school provider. And so some of the things that we are thinking about and moving forward in what this new normal may look like was proposed and is being discussed in our office and other places. And you could kind of see a timeline here that we are in the crisis response still. We are shut down. And as we look toward transitioning in July, August, September, what might this look like from an instructional standpoint, and not just in the immediate near future, but moving forward? Because
I'm sorry, Paul, to interrupt you. Do you have a timeline up in front of you? Because we're still seeing the previous doc.
Yeah, I forgot to do my stop share and share.
Okay. It's okay.
My fault.
I know everybody's going to want to see that timeline because it's such a help.
Well, let me go back to the trying. So
Okay.
this was the slide I was referring to.
Okay.
Learning loss response plan was put together by Arenda. It's just a really high level view of what we might think about moving forward. And I included it because they are absolutely intent on making sure that this is good for all kids, not just some. And so I want to touch on a couple of things that I think are beneficial. So when you look at this timeline of where we are now, I know the governor made some comments that were open in July. Yes, I don't know. There are some significant health issues that need to be resolved before. I still don't know what wide access to testing looks like. I haven't gotten an answer about that. Is that everyone has access to it once a week, once a day? How are we going to really ensure that our staff and our students are safe every time they walk in the building, every single day? What's interesting is we have a number of districts in this county that are on a year-round track. And so they start in July. And they're really deeply rooted in our planning and assumptions. And so they're going to kind of be our test kitchen, if you will. If we are able to open in July, that's really when they start. And then we talked about summer as just, an acceleration of learning and preparing kids for the next grade level. There's also been a lot of dialogue about bringing the kids back with their current teacher, even if it's just a week, because that's someone they know and are familiar with, and do a handoff with the next teacher, just because the relationship may be different if people are really, wearing face masks or they're standing behind a glass partition, which is, it could be a stark reality, as much as I hate to say it. So, so this hybrid phase is really going to be, think about some kids at school, some kids at home. And how do we ensure that continuity of learning? How do we ensure all kids' needs are being met? Who comes to school 2 days a week? Who comes to school 5 days a week? And what is the schedule? What are the transition plans and everything else look like during this time? Can we really go back to the way it was? Was the way we were before working for all of our children? In some cases where there's strong instructional leadership, focus, dedicated teaching, yes, but in most cases, no. I mean, we can honestly say that. So we really do have to look at this situation as an opportunity to bust that apart and make sure that our historically underserved kids are really going to benefit from this new way of life. I've already talked about the fact that, this time in general has really exposed the deficiencies and discrepancies in economic wealth, healthcare, everything. It has blown it up. So how do we fix that? Because if public ed is the one entity where we can shore that up, we have to do this right. And so when you look at some of the historical struggles in our schools, teachers often always say they want more time to work with each other, more time to collaborate, more time to be out of their classroom during the day, more time for individual work with kids. And when you talk to kids, not all of them have a great rapport with the adults on campus. And that's one of the most critical aspects for our kids in order to succeed in our school. So some of the things that we've heard: smaller class size, smaller counseling caseloads, more students to have access to SEL staff, making school culturally relevant, more guided time to work with aides, tutors, and make those support staff roles really meaningful and not just busy work during the school day. Teacher coverage, planning time, enrichment, on and on and on. So what would it look like if instruction came from a different mode and that kids were at school getting tutorials, academic enrichment, the support they needed individually every single day from their teachers and support staffs? You may see pods of kids and adults in different areas of the campus. And if we have a targeted instructional program with incredibly high rigor and the high expectations we want for our kids, imagine what the response could be to meeting their individual needs in this smaller setting. We have to take advantage of that. That's one of the biggest things that we hear in our profession. There are too many kids. If I'm teaching English, in a high school or math, I could have 30 to 40 kids in a class. If I teach 5 periods, you're talking about 150 to 200 kids. We have to leverage this as an opportunity to make sure kids get, number one, that first best instruction, that really high access to core. And then we can use this model as an opportunity to really dig into where their needs are and help support them throughout the school day with targeted support at home as well. And so when they propose this as, these affinity circles, this is really a repository for everybody to put ideas, frustrations and things, and develop this system of support. Someone would call it a village, whether it's instructional, whether it's social emotional, and be able to better respond to our students, their needs, and to track the progress of our kids and be able to respond immediately. We don't want to go through this time in our educational programs and systems and schools where we're just trying to survive. What we've said over and over and over, I have been overwhelmingly inspired, impressed by some of the innovation, some of the creativity, some of the ideas. As I mentioned before, our staff is just joining hands and doing whatever it takes. I have not in this crisis one time heard, that's not my job. I have not heard, well, I can't do that because of this. I think we're uniquely positioned to use this to really start thinking about some of the initiatives that are there that haven't been called to fruition. Our community schools. Our schools can be a hub, not just for academic excellence, but for resources and support and some of the social needs some of our kids desperately need. Our schools, multi-tiered system of support. This just a small example I give gives us a unique opportunity to really go into those tiers and help kids where they need it the most. And then finally, I know I've been talking for 40 minutes and that's awful for me to do, but I use this quote. This came out of our equity department here. That's one of the priorities of our office. And what we believe and what we say every day is that all students deserve a world-class education with high expectations from caring adults who love and support them. And if we do that, and we do that every day, and we make sure our kids have the best people in front of them, we can take on anything. And I am so excited about looking forward to this new challenge, because at least from our office and our organization, we're putting our underserved kids at the forefront and making sure that they're going to come out absolute winners.
Thank you so much. So you definitely have lots of comments, lots of praise for the session and gratitude for the session. So first of all, so there's lots of comments about that, and people thank you for what you've shared. One of the first questions that came through was, but going back to the beginning of your presentation, talking about how you approach addressing the disparate number of students of color, specifically boys of color, who are over-referred for any type of penalty or punishment, whether it be expulsion, suspension, detention, things like that. One of the participants asked, how can classified staff support? And I'm outside of Boston, so I'm not sure exactly, but I'm assuming you do. So
yeah. You know what? I think, one of the things that we talk about within our organization is when we see something that's not right, we have a responsibility to call it out. That doesn't mean lambasting the person that was involved. That means calling it out. So I think that, for a classified employee to go up to the teacher or principal and say, hey, do you mind if I share a perspective about this? Because I think we can actually capture that kid and get him to stop acting this way, but we have to approach it like X, Y, and Z. We all have a responsibility to call these things out every single time they occur. And I can't tell you how many times I call things out every day. It doesn't matter what it is. But I think there's that also, going back to what I shared with these affinity circles from Miranda, the way that we have to define accountability, the way that we have to define, we all have a shared responsibility for student achievement. If a kid is not successful in our programs, that is on us. We have to own this. if we're kicking the same kid out every day, seriously, and when you look at the data, sometimes it's the same classroom, the same individuals. We have to be really in tune with what's working for kids and what isn't, and modifying that and call it. But first and foremost, I think from any adult on campus, I will tell you that it is so important for our classified staff. It doesn't matter if it's the first line of defense in a school. It doesn't matter what role. Our kids need you. Our kids need you. Connect with them. And when you see something that's not right, let's figure out how we can change some of the other aspects of what's not working for kids. It starts with us.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for that. Another question that came through earlier in the presentation when you were talking about the same data is one of the participants would like to know if the data includes those students who learn differently or have a special education classification.
Yes.
Okay. Can you talk a
It's
little bit
inclusive of everybody.
Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to scroll down and see the questions that have come through more recently. There are, definitely comments in the, like as far as like people being able to undergird what it is that you've shared so far. Just trying to look for the questions. All right, when can we expect? Oh, this is for me. Never mind. I was gonna say when can we expect to be posted? I will get to that at the end. Like I mentioned in the beginning, you'll get access to the resources after today's session. All right. So a lot of it is that you are really, a lot of people are really just, what you've been sharing is really resonating with folks, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. Okay. So based on the information that you shared about potential shifts, or not potential, the expected shifts that we may need to make based on how things go, one of the questions is, how are school sites preparing based on this information? So definitely outlined lots of different possible responses and things. So can you speak to that, like how the school sites are preparing?
Yeah, I can't, not from the first person, I'm not in all of those circles, but what we've been doing the past 2 weeks is sharing this information with superintendents and expecting them to go back to their school communities and have a conversation about how we prepare for all of this. Some of that work involves, just surveying parents who intends to continue to participate in distance learning and not be on campus during this pandemic. Who needs our schools every day to go back to work. We need to figure out what those processes look like and what numbers we're dealing with. And then the same holds true. I mean, it gets really tricky with, FERPA and HIPAA, but we are doing an analysis of all of our positions, who could be working remotely, who needs to absolutely be on campus. I think you just have to be very strategic and thoughtful about exploring all options as school communities. And some of this, by the way, is bargainable. We have to negotiate some of these areas with our teachers union and classified unions because it may look different. But, going back to what I had mentioned earlier, I see this increase in adults who are on campus, and even our after school providers are classified, taking a more active role in academic support and being able to work with children on individuals and teams. We just have to consider all of this. Your gymnasium is a huge space, so you can't put 100 people in there anymore, but can you do pods of 10 in corners, or, we're going to have to be really creative. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but what we do is we put it out there so people are making sure that they're at least thinking about it, they're planning for it, about what this new normal is going to look like. And I think in many situations, it's not going to look exactly the same. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach, particularly until we find a vaccine. I mean, we're 12 to 18 months out. So this is something that, from our role and our perspective, we need to just put out some guidance for folks to think about in order to do this successfully. The last thing we want to do is make sure that people are not caught off guard when school opens. They're prepared for anything. That's really what it's about. So.
Thank you. Another question is, what type of support do you think will be needed to actualize this new vision for education?
That's a great question. One of the, obviously, the things that we have to think about that's in that planning guide is number one, our budgets. We don't know yet what the implication for our school budgets moving forward. And now that the tax date has been changed from April to July or postponed, at least in California, our budget is based on tax receipts. It's based on income tax. So we won't even know what our budget is actually until the summer. They're going to put a workload budget in place in May. The legislature will have to approve in June, but we don't know how much money there actually is in there. So that's a little bit different. And with that, I mentioned it earlier, one of the things that we believe in, and the slides that I put up with Arenda, I think, this is going to call for an increase in support for our teachers, our after-school programs, our classified staff, a lot of PD, a lot of training, a lot of investment in social and human capital, and that takes money. So we cannot get started on this soon enough. I know that there was a lot of training that went into effect when folks made that leap into distance learning. And quite frankly, it's all over the place. I wish I didn't have to say that. And some kids are spending 2-3 hours a day with their teachers, some once a week, and everything in between. And so you talk about an inequitable system right now. And that's why we're putting this at the forefront to say, you know what, this is that important. We cannot miss an opportunity, particularly for our kids who have been underserved in our schools. This has to be at the forefront. We have to do it better. I think the biggest investment we make aside from devices and things like that, is just the investment in people and social and human capital.
Thank you. All right, someone told me to not forget to tell you that a fellow Trojan said fight on. So I want to make sure you got that information.
I want to let you know that Marcus Allen is here. Marcus Allen went to high school in San Diego. He's a Trojan, obviously. And thank you.
That's awesome.
My fellow Trojans out there.
All right, so I'm going to reserve the last minute just to give the logistics and the website and survey like I mentioned earlier. So for the next 8 or so minutes, I'll field as many questions as I can from the chat. But if your question's not answered, please remember that you will have an opportunity to share follow-up questions after. Another question that came through is, what is the best way in your mind that as a sort of certificated staff, certificated staff in NorCal or Northern California support a new superintendent with these policies? So I think that's a really pertinent question. I've been thinking about that, what happens when people are new to their role in the midst of this?
This is a new, sorry, I misunderstood. Is this a new superintendent?
Yes, a new superintendent. So I think they're asking is how can the staff be most supportive to a new superintendent with, yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you that I've changed our protocols and practices now. I used to meet with my cabinet once a week. And during this time, I've been meeting with them once a day. And then even daily, I have an expanded cabinet meeting. We have to increase the communication. We have to double down on the communication. My schedule is crazier now than it's ever been. It goes till night at night. But I think that, I don't know, every superintendent runs their division differently, but hopefully, the superintendents are open to ideas and there's lines of communication. I don't know what those protocols are, but to understand what those protocols are and the access to superintendent, finding out what that is first. And secondly, we're all in this together. I mean, it doesn't matter what position you have. I think this is really going to call for teams working together differently. And at least from our perspective, in this organization, we have a direct line to my office, although it comes through the division. Finding out what those things are, first and foremost, but secondly, superintendents don't get a lot of praise they get hit a lot with stuff. And so the more that you're just saying, hey, what can I do to support you, I think is good enough 99% of the time. How can I better support you is probably more than enough in that situation.
I was going to say, because I work pretty closely with, in the town where I live, with the superintendent of our schools. I have 2 children in high school, and I bet that she would agree with you, right? It's a lot of not really getting that necessarily. So I think that hearing that,
I'll tell you, we're very lucky here. We have an incredible board. The board just is loaded with compliments and support. I have a very fortunate situation, and they recognize the hard work of our staff during this time and have been very complimentary, appreciative. We're very lucky and very fortunate in that respect.
Very good. All right, another question is, how has your district gained buy-in from staff to embrace social emotional learning and consider alternatives to suspensions and expulsions?
You know, everything that we do, not too many of our decisions are done in isolation through a cabinet. We have multiple avenues where we engage people at the ground level. And, you know, I meet with our bargaining unit presidents at least once a month. They meet with every single division head once a month. And we work through concerns, ideas, and everything that we do is really anchored in our strategic plan. They're not ideas that we just throw out from left field. Some of this work, you know, I was already in place before I got here. There was already a commitment from the office. But it's really hard when you know how it's going to benefit children, and it's in your plan, it's in your budget. It's just about, you know, training people and figuring out what their role is to support it. When our staff came up with our mission statement for juvenile court and community schools, it's just rooted in social justice and right sizing things. And this is the fabric of our organization. It's not me, it's the teachers, it's the classified. It's just part and parcel of what we do. And so we're using that as leverage now to hopefully support districts and help them along. I think that I don't know anyone that wants to directly hurt kids. I don't, but it happens every single day. And so just breaking through those mentalities and belief systems around doing things a little bit differently. And when it comes to restorative practices, I mean, you're really talking about looking at it through a different lens. And once we get you, we get you. You know what I mean? And but the bottom line is, no one can argue with data. No one can argue with data. No one could sit there and tell me that slide that I put up there that shows the percentage of our African-American children being suspended compared to others is okay. No one can justify that to me. So what are we going to do about it? We have this in place. How can it look differently, and how can we help you along with it? So, you know, I just think that twofold. Data doesn't lie, but the second thing is that we have to engage people in the process of what that looks like and give them some say.
Absolutely. All right, so I'll give this as the last question. If children will be going back to school at different times, how will childcare be addressed? Some parents need to work and children will be home alone.
If you have the answer to that, you will be president of the United States. My goodness, what a loaded question.
I know.
This is the reason why we have to survey our parents and figure out what their needs are. And when you think about it, it's not just as complex as what was just asked. Think about the number of children who have siblings, that if their schools were on different schedules and some of the parents rely on the high school kid to take care of the babies. I mean, it is a really complex issue that we're going to have to figure out real quick.
All right, we actually have time for another, so I'll give you one more. What are your thoughts about the recent talks of budget cuts and reduction of staff in light of the need for an increase in resources?
Well, I don't know if that's fair to say that there's a conversation about cutting staff because we need more stuff. I haven't heard that yet, but I think that the stark reality is we just don't know right now what the budget's going to look like. And I presented that earlier. The Department of Finance doesn't know. The California Department of Education doesn't know. We don't know what the tax receipts are going to be until the summer. And, you know, we still have a couple of fallbacks that are going to support us. And in California, there's $26 billion in reserves. You know, and some people talked about this year being a $5 billion hit. Well, we can support that with our reserves. To what degree our governor is going to use reserves to fill these gaps remains to be seen. And then another thing that's worth, you know, discussion, in 2008, an Obama stimulus package, there was something like $80 billion given to schools across the country. This first care package initiative was only $30 billion. So there is a massive push to say, wait a second, we're buying, all this equipment, having to do all these other things and expend resources. So we anticipate a much larger stimulus package because of the severity of the situation we're in. That 30 was just a first go round. Even for ourselves, in our disaster bins, we collected over 80,000 masks and deployed them to the hospitals from over 1,000 schools in San Diego County. We don't have any, so at the N95. So we just kind of taken on this role of do whatever it takes to help the community, and we'll get through this.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared. It's so invigorating. And for me, I try to be someone who really is a hopeful person continually. And with a situation like this, it takes a lot of hits, right? Because this is a tough situation that we're in. But what you presented today really gives us some hope and some things to kind of be thinking about to make sure that we can imagine, right, or reimagine schools. And right, it's like we don't want to go back to inequitable practice, right? We want to make sure that things are different. And I was in a session earlier in the week with Dr. Bettina Love, who wrote "We Want to Do More Than Survive," and she was talking about like freedom dreaming and like what do we do, right, to not go back to how things were before. So thank you so much for all you've shared. Thank you to everyone. Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you to everyone who honored us with your presence here today. I know that, we all are in different circumstances, and taking this time out to be together is we do appreciate you honoring us with your time. Right now in the chat, I'm going to drop in the link for the survey. So that's the first link coming through. And now I'm going to drop the website. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, on the website, when we're able to load the resources, and some people ask, like, are we going to get everything? It's like, yep, there are 3 different resources that we saw today. You'll be able to receive those. You'll also be able to, for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, there's a button that, or like a link that says follow-up questions. You can send those questions in as well. And if you don't capture the survey link here, the survey link will be available on the website as well. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.